So in that Google form, you also asked about character and dialogue. I'm going to try to tackle this one. Here we go. So the first thing we need to think about with characters is really who they are. And I'm actually going to start talking about villains first because it's a little bit easier to talk about the bad guys since our heroes or our protagonists tend to be a little bit more complex. Take, for example, Sauron from Lord of the Rings, who is bad just because being bad is good, and so to be good, he has to be bad. Or look at the Night King from Game of Thrones, who we have possibilities of what he might do or who he might be, but really we just know him as a bad guy. Or even Bowser from Mario, one dimensional, flat characters. They're just bad. But now let's look at their counterparts. We have Frodo Baggins, who never really amounted to anything and suddenly is given this big task by his grandfather to save the world. And so we're rooting for him to not just save the world, but to overcome all of those self esteem issues that he had before he was provided the task. We also have Jon Snow, who, if you watch Game of Thrones, you know probably more than I do. But if you don't watch Game of Thrones, he uh, he lived with a royal family, even though he supposedly wasn't royal, only to find out seasons later that he is, and he is now probably number one in line for the throne. But the whole time, he's fighting for what he believes is right, not really knowing who he is. And so naturally, because of that complexity in his character, we root for him. Or even think about Mario, who is a plumber, saving princesses from fire breathing dragons. And every time he eats a flower, suddenly he has the ability to hiccup all of these things. He is just an ordinary mustached guy who is able to jump really high, and yet we cheer for him because we see ourselves in him. So we've officially reached the part in this mini lesson where we get down to the nitty gritty of how do I write a good character? And I hope you're seeing this the right way because I'm not fixing it. When we get into writing a character, we have to do some thinking first. We have to do some profiling. And since you're continuing a story, you already have that profile set. You're choosing that character and you're looking at the traits that you analyzed, that you picked, and you are establishing them in your new story. So if you're doing the Telltale Heart and you know that that main character is demented, how can you take that dimension to another plot? Where is he going to go with it? What is going to happen? If you are in the Cask of Amontillado, it's kind of the same thing. You have to pick which character you want to focus on. Obviously, there's really only one choice. So what would he do next? Where would he go? Would he have a sense of pride in what he did? Or would he be driven crazy by the remorse? And that's something you have to think about. Go back in that text and figure out what type of person am I dealing with? Because Poe was very good about making his character seem real to the point that we could relate to him, whether it's with that heart beating or that, oh my God, they won't stop talking kind of piece. Half of you are doing that right now. So I'm going to pause for a second.
Eh? Aspetta, aspetta. No? Macareno. No? Huh, okay. Eh? Oh, taramino, porachino, oh, toca.
So in that clip, you see the two minions, and at first, it seems like one is really annoying. Maybe we could describe him as persistent. You could also describe him as jovial. He seems happy, which is what jovial means. And the other one seems a little bit stoic. He's not giving any inclination as to whether or not he's enjoying what's happening. He does seem a little bit perturbed or maybe easily annoyed, but he's not really um, participating in any way, shape, or form. He's not telling him to stop. He's not saying, hey, that's not okay. He just kind of sits there. And then all of a sudden, he lets out a fart. And it's a really bad fart. Which then makes him seem sort of menacing, like maybe he's been planning it the whole time. And he really makes that first minion upset, and that first minion has to leave the room. Just in that 1 minute, by the way they react to each other, we've seen some characterization. So, in order to talk about this or develop this character a little bit more, we need to start a character profile, especially if we want to make interesting, dynamic characters that are going to let our plot move forward. And the first thing we need to do is decide if they're good or bad. Once we decide if they're good or bad, that's going to help us paint our story a little bit. And sometimes this can be tricky because sometimes you can have a good guy who might seem bad, aka Severus Snape, or a bad guy that seems good, like every boy in a rom-com movie. But we have to think about how we want them to change throughout the arc of our story. I have my notes here, so I just need to make sure I'm doing this right. The other thing that you want to do is sort of pin them up against each other. For example, or pin them up against situations. So, for example, let's say that there's a fight in the cafeteria. Is your character going to be the character that goes to find an adult, that eggs on the fight, or that jumps in to save a friend? Once you start mapping out like what type of person that character is, then you're going to have an easier time when you hit an event in your story figuring out, oh, well, my character's going to do this, so this will happen. So you've done a lot of developing, you've done a lot of like pre-thinking piece. There's one step left. Your BFF is going to be editing. Once you're done like drafting your paper, go back through and look for those sensory details. What does your character look like? What is their face going to look like when somebody says something? Is it going to be that Miss Crumb teacher face where she's like, God, that's ugly? Or is it going to be like a silly face like, are you going to see tears dripping down their face when they're angry? Because you know, when some people are angry, they cry. Or are they going to get really red and puffy? We're going to talk about dialogue in a different video, so don't worry about the things we'll necessarily hear right here. Definitely look at the looks. Do they have a staple piece of clothing? Do they wear their hair a certain way? All of this matters when we're developing that character. So when you go back and you see the event, then portray that imagery in the event. And that'll make things a lot clearer. And then for those of you fretting about 500 words, that'll make it a lot easier to obtain. Good luck.